Welcome to On Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton. Time for a special roundtable. I'm joined by CJ Vogel, Gerry Hamilton, and Jeff Howe, all of On Texas Football as well. We're going to talk about the Texas Longhorns, their season, whether or not the Longhorns deserve one of those at-large bids into the college football playoffs. Obviously, the odds are stacked against Texas. So with that context in mind, guys, Texas finishes 9-3, but there are some real interesting numbers out there that suggest Texas might be among the top 12 teams in the country. First of all, let's get it going. CJ, your general thoughts on the matter, whether or not you think Texas belongs in the college football playoff.
Look, on a head-to-head and talent perspective, playing big teams, yeah, they should be, right? And then you see the record, you see some inconsistencies throughout, and you probably have a pretty good argument that they should not be. Right now, 9-3, considering where other teams are as well, I don't see a path for Texas to make the playoff. I don't think that it's right now a realistic chance at the moment for Texas. And, you know, that's the thing is, had Texas taken care of business, maybe a little prettier with the eye test and beaten some of these SEC teams that they should have beaten a little easier, you have the argument that they didn't need overtime against Mississippi State or Kentucky, and that would have played a large role there. But look, 3 losses is tough, and especially against a 4-8 Florida team. That's really the dagger there. I know that you can point to the Ohio State game and essentially be something that evens out. But right now, I don't think Texas is a playoff team based off of what we've seen with the inconsistencies in the eye test throughout the duration of the year.
Jerry?
So I think they're one of about – after you get past your top 7, which are pretty set in the college football playoff ranking, I think from 8 to 14, 15, I think all those teams can probably make a case that they're worthy of being in the college football playoff. Does that mean I think Texas should be in? That's not what I'm saying. I think, look, Oklahoma can make their case, right? Notre Dame can make their case. Alabama certainly is in the SEC championship. BYU can make their case. That's the lesser one for me. Miami can certainly make theirs, Vanderbilt, and then Texas. So I think there's always where we're at in the 12-team playoff, you're going to have about 14, maybe 15 teams that raise their hand and say, hey, we should be in, or we're going to make our case to be in. To this, when it goes to 16, that number will probably get to 18 or 19 because you have 3 lost teams involved at that point. I think the problem for Texas is, and I hear the discussion is if they hadn't played Ohio State and they played somebody else, then Texas would be 10-2 and be top 8, right? Probably
they'd be ranked ahead of Oklahoma if they were 10-2.
That's right. So they'd be 8. They'd be top 8, right? So I hear the argument. I think and I'm not saying I disagree with that. I think the problem from a committee standpoint is I think it's the eye test of the entire season is what the Kentucky game when you could barely muster 170 yards of offense against a team that lost 41-0 to Louisville yesterday, by the way, and has gotten blown out. The struggles, the up and down, not showing up for your first SEC game on the road, not showing up essentially is what happened. I think those things are hard to overcome when it gets down to a you versus somebody else scenario. Texas didn't get the help they needed yesterday. Look, I'll say this. If Vanderbilt had lost yesterday and Miami had lost yesterday, I think Texas has a much, much better argument to be in. And I know they beat Vanderbilt and I know they beat Oklahoma head-to-head, but I think they needed a little help yesterday to make the argument, push the argument over the top.
Jeff, you have any thoughts? Jerry, I have some retorts to what you're going to say, but I want to let Jeff say his piece first.
Look, does Texas deserve to be in the playoff? Yes. If the argument is, hey, are they one of the 7 best at-large teams you could put in the field? Then yes, 100% Texas is in that conversation. I think it's disingenuous to say that the argument's a house of cards or that Texas has no argument. They very much have an argument. Look at the AP top 25 that we're looking at right now. And I know the AP poll is not the same as the CFP rankings, but if you look at the 13 teams ranked ahead of Texas, they played 5 teams on that list and went 3-2 against them. Yep. So yes, Texas has an argument. To piggyback off Jerry's point, and I said this, after the Florida loss, after the Oklahoma win, when, really kind of right around Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, if you go 9-3, you leave it in the hands of the committee And then all of the stuff that could be perceived as a negative, all that stuff is going to come to the forefront, which is what we're saying, which is just what Gerry talked about, the loss to Florida. You didn't play well against Kentucky. You didn't play well against Mississippi State. You had Vanderbilt blown out and you let them back into the game. So you weren't great early in the season. So all that stuff comes up. But if we're talking about to me, and maybe I'm wrong, you guys can tell me, but if you're taking the five highest ranked conference champions and then the 7 best at-large teams for this playoff, if you're going to sit there and tell me that Texas is not one of the best 7 at-large teams, I don't believe that. Then let's stop saying that that's the criteria. And
yeah, because I mean, to your point, North Texas and Tulane,
100%.
Are they really one or 2 of the top 12 teams in the country?
Right.
No.
Throw Virginia in there as well. This is supposed to give us the very best college football tournament to decide a national champion. And if you're going to tell me there's a realistic possibility where Texas and let's say Texas, Vanderbilt, and Miami, where they're out of it and 2 G5 teams are in, because that realistically could happen, then I'm with Gerry. Just scrap it. Just go to 16. Let's get rid of the AQ stuff, and let's just get the 16 best teams at the end of the year to have a tournament. But under the current format, as I believe it's constructed, 100%, Texas is one of the 7 best at-large teams that could get into this thing.
Yeah, to your point, Jeff, Texas beating number 7, number 8, and number 13 in that AP top 25. Look, there are a lot of aspects to this that I think we need to go through. Gerry, first of all, said about the Ohio State game, if Texas is 10-2, where are they ranked? And he's right. They're ranked in the top 7 or 8 in the country right now. And nobody's talking about narrow wins, because guess what? Alabama's had 5 wins by 1 score or less. Okay? It's not like Auburn didn't have the ball on the 20 last night against Alabama trying to score, right? And so it's not like Oklahoma didn't have near wins against half a dozen conference teams. So let's call it what it is. I want to go into this next point for y'all. The SEC teams that had winning records this year, there were 7 of them. I mean, I'm talking about within conference play. So I take the Samfords and Chattanoogas and all that out of it. But I'm talking about in conference play. There were 7 teams in the SEC that had winning records in conference play. Texas was 6-2, Ole Miss 7-1, Bama 7-1, Georgia 7-1, A&M 7-1, and then Oklahoma and Vandy joined Texas at 6-2. Okay, Texas beat both OU and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, as their marquee non-conference game, played Virginia Tech. Oklahoma played Michigan. Okay, does anybody think Texas wouldn't have beaten those 2 teams? All right, Texas, being well, played the number 1 team in the country. That's why they're 9-3. In conference, among the elite teams, Texas actually has the best record of those 7. Texas is 3-1 against these 7 teams. Georgia's 2-1. Bama's 1-1. Ole Miss is 1-1. A&M is next, 5th actually is OU at 1-2. A&M is 0-1, and Vandy's 0-2. So, look, when I talk about why I think Texas belongs in the tournament, it's almost like the NCAA basketball tournament. It's who you beat that matters, not necessarily who you lose to. Because one of the, and I say this with tongue in cheek a little bit, it obviously matters if you have an absorbent amount of losses, right? Or more loss, etc. The issue is this. Texas right now would at 10-2 would be at 7. And furthermore, the NCAA basketball tournament picks teams by who you beat, not who you lose to, because they want to see a team that actually can compete for a national championship. To Jeff Howe's point, is Texas one of the best 12 teams in the country right now? They probably weren't at week 5. They probably weren't at week 8. As of week 12, they are. And I think some of these preconceptions and the loss to Ohio State actually playing Ohio State are jading that. Jeff, you mentioned in our pre-show meeting, I mean, Michigan beats Maryland last week, and they jumped 5 spots. Maryland. Texas beats Texas A&M yesterday. They jumped 2 spots.
Okay.
I think there's some preconceived notions going on here, and one of them is if you lose out of conference to a big-time power, do you even play the game? Do you even play the game going forward? I think that's what Steve Sarkisian was getting at in the press conference. CJ, that SEC record against elite teams, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's the biggest selling point for Texas to make the tournament, to your point. And it's the way in which Texas beat these teams, right? Oklahoma didn't score a touchdown. They didn't find the end zone for the second straight year.
Three-score win.
Texas A&M, that was a double-digit win again, in which you dominated the second half. It was a sloppy game up front, but Texas turned the corner and very clearly was the better coached team. They had more talent on the outside, and again, doing so in a fashion where it felt like they dominated the second half. They were up by 17 against Vanderbilt as well. That game was out of hand. They dominated these 3 teams, and that's the biggest selling point for Texas. And so, to your point, is Texas on paper, talent-wise, a top 12 team in the country? Absolutely. And they've proven that through these big games. Again, though, and I think that's where the conversation is. It's those losses, Bobby. They're going to find ways to pick you apart, and that's what's standing out right now, even with those big 3 marquee wins that other teams, no one else in the country has.
Jerry?
Yeah, I mean, so what you're talking about with the NCAA tournament, I agree. I think Texas is the only team with a team that would have a quad 3 loss. And that's the big thing right there. And Alabama at the beginning of the year bounced back and won 9 games in a row. Now they're 10-2, right? And going to the SEC championship game. Yeah. But I think it's just the inconsistencies. I mean, look, here's the good and the bad of having Arch Manning. The good is you have Arch Manning. The bad is now everybody's watching you week to week. And you're under a microscope more so than some other teams are, whether that's fair or not. So people are really going to hyper judge what they see from your team. That's part of having a superstar level name or player on your team. But look, I think the whole thing is, if there wasn't a G5 automatic qualifier, I mean, there's 2 issues here. G5 automatic qualifier is 1. And then 2, because that's friendship minutes on a football field or basketball court. That's all that is friendship minutes.
It's unbelievable.
Or kumbayaing a college football playoff. It's fine in basketball because you have 68 teams, right? And you need to reward every teams, and that makes for a great tournament. We're not there yet. We have 12. So none of those teams. I mean, even last year with Boise State, they're not a college football playoff team. Not if we're really trying to decide this thing. The other thing is, this is all going to change next year because the SEC is going to more of a balanced schedule in the 9-game schedule. Ole Miss had a really pretty easy schedule this year, and they took advantage of it. A&M's schedule, A&M, people said last year, Texas schedule, blah, blah, blah. A&M had very similar schedule this year. They took advantage of it. Next year, though, these schedules are going to be much more even for all the teams in the SEC. And I think we're going to have a big change in the college football playoff next year because of that. But we're talking about this year. Look, do I think Texas, if we just had 12 teams, here it is, 12 teams, I could make the argument for Texas to be in, period. I think that's easy to do. I think the big thing is that when you're at that level team, you're going to be pretty scrutinized. So, like, here's what I'll say.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So you're going to be pretty heavily scrutinized. Okay. And you're saying that wins like Alabama's wins all in a row and all this stuff. Well, and Miami's going back to the fact that they beat Notre Dame early. So now they
still may not be there, by the way.
Let me ask you this, though. Okay. If timing of wins doesn't matter sometimes, then it shouldn't matter at any time. So A&M beat Notre Dame at Notre Dame, right?
Yeah.
Well, A&M just made a similar trip to Austin and lost.
Yeah.
Now, Notre Dame, outside of USC and their season this year, and the 2 that they lost, Miami and A&M.
Yeah.
Okay. They played USC, and that's it. I mean, they've got nobody. And so you can't tell me and sit here and say this and then go that direction. Hey,
well,
what
I
do
want
you-
to say this. I want to say this. Miami beat Notre Dame and still may not get in. So they actually played the tough non-conference game and won it and may still not get in. To the point, look, I mean, if Michigan had traveled to Oklahoma, they'd have another win too. Where would they be on the ranking? So there's so many things that factor in. The other thing I'll say is, and I think the SEC from a talent perspective is easily the most talented, not easily, it's the most talented conference in the country. I don't want to do a disservice to the Big Ten. But even yesterday in rivalry games, Kentucky loses to Louisville by 41, and South Carolina gets beat by double digits against Clemson. Clemson's not a good team this year. Louisville went into a boom in November. So the SEC, we talk about this all the time, but they just got dotted twice yesterday in rivalry games by ACC teams. So I think all this stuff kind of factors in.
Hey, Jeff, what do you think about this this SEC record against elite teams?
I'll back up what CJ said. It's the best argument Texas has at this point, but it's something Gerry said that I think is really valuable to remember here. The SEC with an 8-game conference schedule, there's no way in a 16-team league with an 8-game conference schedule you can have anything closely resembling equitable scheduling. It just can't happen.
Yep.
So it just so happened this year that, look, I mean, when going into the year, did we think Vanderbilt was going to be able to count as a potential top 10 win for Texas? Probably not. But when you looked at A&M's schedule, oh man, they got to go to Baton Rouge and look at some of their other games. Yeah, Texas ended up having an infinitely harder schedule. And this isn't to knock A&M, because I think if you go 7-1 in the SEC, you deserve to be in the playoff. Like, you handled your business. You beat the teams that were in front of you, except Texas. So I got no problem with A&M. My thing is, as we transition into the SEC having a 9-game schedule, to Jerry's point, I don't see why you would need to play the Power 4 team outside of conference play if you're going to play 9 teams within your conference. And if in a 9-game schedule, 4 or 5 of those are probably going to be top 25 teams, and a couple of those are probably going to be top 10 type teams. So to me, there is no reason to play that big non-conference game. And it's just I've had a lot of nuances been crawling through my brain the last couple of days trying to digest all this. I think one entity that Texas really should be pissed off at, and if you're a Texas fan isn't getting enough grief, is Fox. Because when Texas left the Big 12 to go to the SEC, Fox influenced the schedule change to where Texas in back-to-back years had to go to Michigan and had to go to Ohio State because Fox won one of those games. If Texas hosts Michigan this year, we all said at the top of the show, Texas is a better team than Michigan. If Texas hosts Michigan instead of going to Ohio State, we're not having this conversation right now, because Texas is 10-2 with a power conference win outside of conference, and it's all said and done. So I'll give Fox their share of blame just because it's fun to just dump on Fox. But no, I think and that also. But as we go towards 16 teams, that's why I think the AQ stuff and the G5. There's no way you can tell me that any of those SEC or Big Ten teams playing a 9-game conference schedule that it's anywhere close to what a Big 12 or an ACC team has to face. Because it's not. On no planet would anybody with a brain think that that's rational. So I think you've got to consider, you can't just look at, well, this team is 10-2, this team is 9-3, therefore the 10-2 team gets in. Not all records are created equal. And I know people say, well, you are what your record says you are. Yeah, but go look at the schedule Texas played, the one Miami played, Vanderbilt schedule, Notre Dame schedule. Put all those schedules together of all the 10-2 teams and tell me which one was the tougher schedule.
To Jeff's point,
schedule by a mile.
To Jeff's point, that's where Texas was truly behind the 8 ball when the playoff rankings came out last week on Tuesday. And 3-loss Texas was behind. They essentially said this is a wins and losses deal to a certain extent. When they had Michigan, Texas played a harder schedule. Vanderbilt, Texas won head-to-head and played a harder schedule when they had one loss more at the time. And you keep going up that list. Utah, does anybody think Utah was 5 spots better than Texas in a playoff ranking? Give me a break. So the committee set this whole thing up to this argument we're having now, because if Texas had been slotted up a little bit more, if head-to-head matter, look, and I'd be okay with Oklahoma being ahead because I don't care if Tennessee's 8-4, what happened yesterday. If you go back on the road back-to-back and win at Tennessee and Alabama, you probably deserve some kudos for that, right? I mean, you really do. That's not easy in the SEC to do back-to-back. So, But I think that's the committee when they said, all right, if you have one loss less, even if your schedule isn't as tough as the 3-loss team that maybe even beat you, then they did it with Notre Dame and Miami too, by the way. So it's not just a Texas thing. That was 2-loss, but Miami won the game and was slotted 3 spots behind Notre Dame. So the committee kind of showed their cards last week in the ranking, and that's where we're at today. They're not in a position to sit there and jump Texas up to be in a position to be in the playoff because of the way they ranked the teams last week, and all those teams won big yesterday. How do they justify the drops?
Yeah, I think they had preconceived notions and they got turned on their ear by Texas beating the out of A&M. I mean, Texas physically whipped A&M, and they simultaneously showed a real weakness in A&M. By the way, CJ, you had a tweet yesterday about Marcel Reed's downfield passing. He completed only 3 of 9 passes beyond 10 yards, and that is maybe his issue overall when it comes to winning games. 2 of those, and 2. He also had 2 interceptions beyond 10 yards. So I think there's some issues there that A&M was not exposed when they were playing the South Carolinas of the world, maybe. The only win they had of note was Missouri at Missouri. If you look at their real schedule, everything else was at home. And then they had Notre Dame early. So I don't know. I don't know if A&M, I know that they're 11-1, so they're in, Jeff. You said that. I've got no problem with them being in. I want to be clear. I think they had comparing their schedule this year to Texas's last year in conference is ridiculous. They never played a Georgia last year or this year in conference, other than Texas. I mean, their schedule is much more of a cakewalk this year than Texas last year.
Sorry, Bobby. The bigger problem to me, though, and why I think the only answer is to go to 16 teams and get rid of the AQ stuff is something Gerry said. You're telling me that not only we're talking Texas scheduling Ohio State and having to go to Ohio State and play that game to open the year, but you're going to tell me there's a world too where Michigan going to Oklahoma, they could have avoided that. Miami playing Notre Dame and beating them, it might not matter at the end of the day. Like it's just it's doing what I hoped it wouldn't, and it's de-incentivizing, for lack of a better word, Power 4 programs to play each other in the non-conference. Where, I mean, at this point, if I'm Greg Sankey, I change the rules because I say, look, why don't we just get rid of the conference championship game? Everybody play a conference schedule, and then instead of a conference championship game, or just save one, hey, maybe your last game is, hey, let's just pair off and play like basically play-in games within conference. So, I mean, I don't. It sucks because I love those early season interconference matchups. And for rivalry weekend, I know you've got like Georgia Tech, and Bobby, you mentioned one, Clemson, South Carolina. Like you keep some of those. It just, I hate the fact that, you go out and you schedule a really tough opponent and you play this schedule and you finish with a good record. And in the case of Miami, it might not matter. And in the case of Michigan and Texas, like, yeah, you're being punished for playing a game that not a lot of other teams in the country would have gone and played.
I think eventually, if they're going to keep a 12-game college football schedule, regular season, I think you could go to a 10-game conference schedule. One game in the SEC plays one SEC team plays a Big Ten team every year. That gets you at 11, and then you have a warm-up game versus Chattanooga. Otherwise, teams are going to continually compare, and this committee, which is made up of equal amounts of big conferences and even the smaller ones like the Big 12 and the ACC, they all have a seat at the table. They're going to say they're equal, maybe more equal than they are. And my point being, if that's the case, then maybe the Big 10 and the SEC should do something like go to 10-game conference schedules, and then let's really see where, not just 9, but 10, and see where it really comes out, and then play one inter-conference game against each other. All right, last thing I want to get to, and this is my next piece that I was going to say for this Texas team. I mentioned the NCAA basketball tournament, how they prefer big wins. I talked about the elite teams that Texas beat and had the best record among those in the SEC. What do you think Vegas thinks? Nick Saban tried to pull this 2 years ago, right, with Alabama when they didn't get in. Remember that? Or Oh, no, last year it was. We should get in. We should be one of the top 12 because Vegas put the lineup in Vegas and see who would be favored, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where would Texas rank Vegas right now? I mean, I think there would maybe be 3 teams that would be favored over Texas right now. Georgia, Ohio State, and maybe Notre Dame. I think Oregon would be pick'em. I think Indiana would be pick'em at best. And I know some people are going to look at me crossways, but Texas would be favored against OU, would they not? Texas would be favored against A&M, would they not? Just beat one team by three scores, another by 2.
I think there would be I think Ohio State, I think Vegas, probably Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, maybe Oregon would be favored. I think Miami, probably a pick'em game because Miami's like Texas. They're super talented, who's underachieved this year, honestly. Super talented. That might be a pick'em.
You going to Alabama over Texas if you're Vegas? You going to Vanderbilt over Texas if you're Vegas?
No. Well, Bama may be a pick'em game. Notre Dame is probably maybe a slight favorite. Yeah, I mean, so Texas would be about anywhere from 6, 7, or 8, right? Whatever you. So they would
anywhere from 4 to 8, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I hear you what you're saying about Indiana. You know, Indiana had a relative, other than Oregon and Penn State, they had a relatively easy schedule. Now they dispatched with them easily. CJ, I know you're a big Indiana fan. Well, and you actually like to gamble a little.
Yeah.
What would the folks in Vegas say?
Look, it's tough, because talent-wise, and you go off the FPI, you go off of all the stars in the range. Texas is a more talented team on paper, but that doesn't take into account the ups and downs that we've seen for 12 games this year with Texas. And so when you talk about a Vegas line, could Texas be favored? Sure. Does that mean Texas will win that game? Who am I to say? I don't necessarily think so, because I think Indiana is a very disciplined football team. Texas not. I think Indiana takes care of their food. Texas, obviously, we've seen that for 12 weeks. It's a coin flip. So, the hypothetical favorite, yeah, it could be. I don't think it equates to Texas, being one more deserving, or 2, knowing that they would go out there and beat Indiana. I don't think that's a guarantee there.
So even Indiana, would they be ranked if in Vegas? Would they be 5 through 8, or would they be 9 through 12 in this category? In your opinion,
for this
if Texas made the college football playoffs, okay, somehow, some way, where would the odds makers place Texas winning the national championship? Would it be 5 through 8, like somewhere in that range?
It would be 5 through 8.
It wouldn't be 9 through 12, in my opinion.
No, it would not. And again, that goes to the ceiling that we've seen from Texas. They can beat anybody in the top 12. We've seen that 3 times this season. Not to mention the star rating in the name of Arch Manning and Steve Sarkisian in Texas. That's going to play into the factor. But again, look, I just don't think that that's something they'll take into account, because, look, we've seen it for 12 weeks. You don't know which Texas you're going to get. And this is the other point I wanted to make. It's no guarantee Texas plays well in the playoff. We've seen 3 times this year where Texas had extended amount of time to prepare for an opponent, and they came up flat in all 3 instances. You had all summer to prepare for Ohio State. You scored 1 touchdown. Came in, 7 minutes left. You had a week to prepare for Florida. You came out flat, got whooped in the first half. The game was basically over by the time you entered the 4th. You had a whole week to prepare for Georgia. You scored 3 points in the first half. So, again, you talk about the raised stakes. You also talk about that extended amount of time. And, it's great that you get to prepare an extra week. But why am I to believe that Texas would give anybody a fight, knowing that they've had all year 3 different instances to come out and do exactly that, and they failed all 3 times?
They're 6-1 in their last 7 games. Texas has become a more consistent team down the stretch, in my opinion. It's particularly on offense. Jeff?
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying, CJ, but I think this goes back to something, Gerry, I think you mentioned it a while back. When we talk about the best teams in the country, I think there's a cutoff. Matthew, if can we pull the AP poll back up? Because, again, that's all we've got to go on right now. But, there's a cutoff. And I think once you start getting into the 2-loss teams, Alabama, Notre Dame, Miami, and then Texas with 3 losses, they've all got blemishes at that point. So, CJ, the same argument you made for Texas just now, I could say the same thing about Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Alabama, Miami. You could probably make the same argument for A&M. I mean, look at any of those SEC or Big Ten teams and tell me that Texas Tech played a schedule that's anything like what any of those teams played. So do we really know like what Texas Tech would do? So I think it's
but that's the difference though. And again, it goes to Indiana too. They beat the hell out of teams in Texas.
That is true. That's
for
true.
the most
So
part.
does Texas Tech.
Texas Tech, Indiana. I mean, these teams that aren't playing great, tough schedules, you don't have these Kentucky games. You don't have these Mississippi State games where you needed a 17-point miracle to come back. That's, again, going back to the eye test for me with Texas. You just don't know. It's a total coin flip for me. And I know with those teams that we're talking about with these inferior schedules, at least the consistency is going to be on their side in the argument.
Yeah, I just think to me, when I look at this, my cutoff, and maybe it's recency bias on my part, but like A&M, because Bobby, I think you're right. I think Texas exposed some things that other teams can take advantage of. I think once you start getting from 7 on down, everybody's got blemishes, and you're comparing blemishes at that point. So any of those teams could get hot. Any of those teams could have a bad game. So to me, that's not the issue. My issue with this whole thing goes back to the committee's trying to make it equitable and trying to make it fair, and in no way, shape, or form is this fair. Like there's a world, like we're going to live in a world where, depending on how the conference championships shake out, like if Oregon ends up being the 5th seed, right? As a college football fan, what would you rather see? Oregon host Tulane or North Texas or Boise, or Texas going to Eugene trying to win a first-round playoff?
No question.
I know what I'd rather see. So let's just stop talking about like, oh, we're putting the best teams in here. Because you're not. I think this is going to have the adverse effect that I think everybody thought it would, when all these teams that are, like I said, Michigan, Texas, Miami, we played these tough games in non-conference and it didn't matter. So when you go to 16, you're going to eliminate the AQ spots, and it's just going to be, hey, who are these 16 best teams in the country? Let's put them in a playoff and let's let them decide it on the field.
Can I ask a question of all you guys real quick? Because I think this is important, because I'm interested to see what everybody thinks. So Texas last week in the college football playoff was 16, right? They're for sure moving up a spot because Michigan lost. But when this ranking comes out Tuesday, are they going to jump anybody that was ahead of them?
Their third top 10. I mean, they certainly should.
Utah should fall below them. One loss less or not. They gave up 500 yards rushing to K-State and got lucky against Kansas. Bottom line. They should move ahead of them, right? I mean, Vanderbilt had that huge win, so Texas probably won't move ahead of them. But do y'all think Texas is going to move ahead of either Utah or Vanderbilt next on Tuesday? Because I do think that's what's interesting about some of this too, is from the committee perspective, they showed their hand. They played their hand last week. Well, all those teams won. Utah should never been 13, though, is the problem. So is the committee going to move Texas ahead of a couple of teams because of the A&M win, or no?
I'm not confident, Jerry, that they will, but they should, based on their criteria of, hey, each week is a new week. So basically you're taking resumes from the previous week, throw them in the paper shredder, and now let's just set it all out on the table again. So to me, if you're comparing resumes between Texas and Vanderbilt and Texas and Utah, yeah, I think Texas should be ahead of those two teams, but I'm not confident that that'll happen.
What are Miami's big wins right now?
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame, and that's it, right?
Well, I mean, Pittsburgh's a good team, and that's a road game, and they that's a good win.
Okay, that's 2.
Yeah, I mean that's.
There's a number by Florida State's name there for a reason.
I just want to say this. You look at that chart for Miami. I get it. Okay. What about Notre Dame?
Yeah.
Do they get credit for beating Navy?
You know what Heather Dinich said, which is interesting. What Heather Dinich said yesterday, who does a good job with ESPN on the college football playoff. That's her gig. That Miami's win over Florida and Texas losing to Florida is a factor in the ranking, which I don't know if people agree with that or not, but she mentioned that in an interview, which is interesting to me.
Was it the Miami game? Where was the Miami versus Florida game?
I was at Miami for sure.
Yeah, it was at Miami.
They beat them down too.
Yeah.
I mean, Florida had 120 yards in that game or something stupid like that. 140.
No, it could be. It
But
very
see,
well could
yeah,
be.
but Jerry, then that's where it gets real convoluted because then you could turn around and say, well, Florida beat Florida State, and now that Florida State loss
Right.
for Alabama is to a team that's not bowl eligible.
Yeah.
So I've always said, man, you start using transitive property in football, you're playing a dangerous game, and that is a slippery slope.
Yep.
All right, guys. That's going to do it for today's show, special episode. We thought we'd do a little roundtable, talk a little college football playoff action and where the Longhorns sit. Thank you to CJ. Thank you to Jeff and Gerry Hamilton, as well as our producer, Matt Hutchison, behind the scenes. That'll do it for this afternoon. Jerry and Rod Babers will be back tonight hosting the live stream, answering your questions. They'll be talking a little recruiting action. Texas picked up a couple of commitments yesterday. Got some news coming. Wednesday is National Signing Day, and then we are all in on the portal over the next month and a half because Texas is definitely going to hit that hard. For the guys here at On Texas Football, hope you guys are having a good weekend. Hook 'em horns.